and just beyond the extreme limit of its allotted search, spotted a large formation of ships. The message dispatched to Midway read, "Sighted main body," and a few minutes later gave its bearing and range. Although the distance, 700 miles, was within the capabilities of Midway's B-17 bombers, which already had their extra fuel tanks fitted and were armed and waiting, Midway's commanders were unwilling to commit their forces without more information. It would be another 2 hours of steadily mounting tension before a radio message confirmed the sighting of a large body of Japanese warships. Meanwhile, reports of the sighting were passed to the American carriers. The 2 American carrier task forces were waiting 325 miles to the northeast of Midway. The Catalina's report placed the Japanese main body to the southwest. However, Nimitz was confident of his intelligence sources and certain that the ships were only the Japanese invasion force. Nimitz signaled his commanders, "The carrier strike force will hit from the northwest tomorrow." Fletcher ordered Enterprise and Hornet to change course, and both task forces headed south to lie in wait. With the sighting of the Japanese invasion fleet confirmed, Midway's B-17s were finally given the order to attack. At 12:25 hours, 9 bombers lumbered down the island's runway to launch the first attack of the Battle of Midway. It would take over 4 hours for the B-17s to reach the enemy fleet and begin their high-level runs. Because of their extra fuel tanks, the fortresses were carrying only 36 500-pound bombs between them. None struck home. From altitude, the effects were hard to judge, and the crews reported hits on 6 vessels, including 2 battleships. In the aftermath, the US Army Air Force would claim a major victory for land-based high-level bombers. Throughout the night of June the 3rd, the atmosphere on Midway was tense but confident. The reports of the B-17 crews were encouraging. Everyone believed that at least some damage had been done to the Japanese fleet. During the night, a Catalina torpedo attack on the invasion transports did succeed in hitting 1 Japanese oiler. Insignificant in real terms, but heartening for the waiting Marines. At first light, Midway's Catalinas were once more dispatched on their reconnaissance patrols. Because a Japanese raid on the airfield was almost certain, the B-17s were ordered to take off once more to prevent them being caught on the ground. As the Japanese carrier strike force steamed at 24 knots on its final run into Midway, sailors and aircrew prepared themselves for the ordeal ahead with the traditional toasts and worship at the Shinto shrine on board every Japanese warship. All were keenly aware that they were about to strike the first major blow in a battle on which depended not only their own lives, but the future of the Japanese Empire. At 0430, Admiral Nagumo turned his carriers into the wind and launched his first strike wave, 108 aircraft in all. The rest, including his most experienced aircrew, were held in reserve in case any American warships were discovered. Nagumo believed the possibility extremely remote, so only after his first wave had been sent to Midway did he order his reconnaissance aircraft to begin their search of the surrounding ocean. The search, mounted by the Japanese carrier strike force, was conducted by only 7 aircraft from 5 ships. Akagi and Kaga each launched 1 VAL at 0430. Both aircraft were to search 300 miles out and could cover an area 60 miles wide. At the same time, the battleship Haruna launched 1 float plane with a range of 150 miles. The cruisers Tone and Chikuma were each to dispatch 2 float planes, but technical problems delayed Tone's aircraft for up to half an hour, and one of Chikuma's developed engine trouble and would have to turn back. The search was dangerously incomplete. As the Japanese scouted for American carriers, Midway's Catalinas were, in their turn, looking for the Japanese. At 0530, a single enemy carrier was sighted. On Midway Island and on the ships of the American task forces, the effect was electrifying. The Japanese were exactly where Admiral Nimitz had expected them to be. Shortly after the first sighting, one more vital piece of information was received from the Catalinas. A wave of strike aircraft was approaching the island. To Admiral Spruance, on board Enterprise, it was a priceless piece of information. Soon after the aircraft had hit Midway, the Japanese carriers would have to retrieve them for rearming and refueling. At that point, the carriers would be supremely vulnerable. As the Japanese strike wave came within range of Midway radar, all the island's remaining aircraft were scrambled. When the enemy arrived, the runways and hangars would be clear. Midway's fighters would be waiting to meet them, and the island's force of bombers and torpedo bombers would already be on their way to strike back at the Japanese carriers. In spite of the valiant efforts of Midway's mostly obsolete fighters, the Japanese bombers and dive bombers broke through without having lost a single aircraft. However, as soon as the lead attackers came within range of the island's anti-aircraft guns, they were met by a hail of fire. Finding no American planes on the ground, the bombers attacked and destroyed Midway's oil tanks on Sand Island. At the same time, the dive bombers targeted the airfield and hangars on Eastern Island and destroyed virtually every building in sight. With 15 of Midway's defending fighters already shot down, the Japanese fighters were now free to strafe ground